commitment, and you want consistency. And I agree. And the first step in doing that is having an industrial strategy. And our industrial strategy won't just be a PDF on the government's website, subject to the whim of the current business secretary or chancellor. It will coordinate the work of the whole government, not just the business department. It will be permanent, with an industrial strategy council made up of business and union leaders that's placed on a statutory footing. And it will report against the government's progress in the same way the Committee for Climate Change does for the net zero targets. It is about having good, effective policy, but it's also about providing confidence that the UK has the institutions to make us a stable and consistent place to invest. And on things like carbon capture and hydrogen and life sciences and quantum computing, these areas are so exciting, and British innovation is so abundant. I ask myself, how can it be that we have the lowest business investment in the G7? And the answer is neither the government nor the private sector working alone can achieve what is required. Private investment is the only way we'll meet our objectives. But government has a role to play in market shaping and building the investable case. And that is what we want to do. And in the coming months, we'll publish more of our sector plans, like the automotive plan we published in September, so businesses can have a clear set of policies and priorities a future Labour government will pursue. If you take that example of the automotive sector, you can't provide what the industry needs unless you are simultaneously addressing battery capacity and energy costs and the charging infrastructure and the rules of origin and consumer confidence at the same time. So I value your input and thoughts as we put these programs together, and I hope they are an example of the partnership working that we would pursue in government. Because that desire to increase investment in the British economy, that is my fundamental priority. And I know it was some time ago, but under the last Labour government, business investment was higher than it is now. In fact, if the Conservatives had matched Labour's record, there would be £50 billion a year added to the UK economy from the growth that business investment brings. And I think we can show the public the benefits that that would bring on their high streets and in their pay packets. But boosting that investment won't come from gimmicks or short-term measures. As we approach the autumn statement this week, there'll be lots of talk about test balloons and rabbits out of hats, and that can make for great news. But it isn't the comprehensive plan needed for British business to succeed. And of course, we will watch what the Chancellor says this week with interest. But I say to you all, we don't need things that generate a few headlines. We need a long-term plan for national renewal. And that is the total business environment we are proposing. And you know that much of the policy that affects your firms isn't actually in the remit of the business department or even of the Treasury. It requires a whole government approach. So when it comes to your biggest asset, the people who work for you, Labour's plan will see you have greater flexibility over the apprenticeship levy that you have asked for, allowing you to tailor the training to the needs of your company. It will see more technical excellence colleges, so you have a pipeline of staff whose skills match your needs. And our new deal for working people is an economic policy designed to give you a more invested workforce that you can retain for longer. And our Green Prosperity Plan, with its mission to deliver clean power by 2030, represents a huge opportunity. And that plan and the creation of GB Energy is about public investment that acts as a catalyst to create the case for the private investment that we want to attract. It's about crowding in, not crowding out. And we've seen some recognition of this from the government with the Tata Gigafactory and the green steel announcements. But our policy is explicit. It's more ambitious and it's more transparent. And it's not just about those businesses directly involved with the transition, exciting as those are. It's about an entire economy where Britain has cheaper and more secure energy, which is never again exposed to the price volatility we saw following the invasion of Ukraine. And Labour will take on the other blockage in our economy. It's too hard to build things in Britain, be it a house, a factory, or a wind turbine. So we'll fix our broken planning system and get Britain building again with key projects, such as gigafactories or labs, given new national policy statements and tough national planning policy to get them built. And we'll deploy political capital to get the homes built that this country is crying out for. But we also know that one of the single biggest obstacles to getting shovels in the ground is grid capacity. So a Labour government would oversee the largest upgrade to our national transmission infrastructure in a generation, empowering a future systems operator to take on the role of system architect and implementing measures that use our energy system in a smarter way to reduce pressures on the grid. And we'll take the grown-up approach to Brexit this government has lacked. We know we can do better. Now, Labour will not be seeking to rejoin the single market or the customs union or to reopen the wounds of the past. But it's right that we get a better deal. Because even with the additions of the Windsor Framework and the reassociation agreement with Horizon, there are real improvements we could achieve. If New Zealand can have a veterinary agreement with our closest neighbours, I don't think it's fanciful that we could too. And the same is true for the mutual recognition of professional qualifications, for touring rights for the creative industries, and easier intercompany transfers. And we want to unlock the barriers to investment that are holding you back. Our Startup Scale-Up Review proposed ways to strengthen the British Business Bank and the availability of growth capital, and we'll continue to develop those plans as well as following the work of the Capital Markets and Industry Task Force. And this work is alongside our specific commitments to help smaller businesses by tackling things like late payments, to strengthen devolution and the role that mayors play in their local economies, and to replace business rates with a fairer system. This is our comprehensive plan for business. It's not one-off rabbits for the sake of headlines. It's giving you what you need on skills, energy, trade, finance, and taxation. And we'll keep adding to that to make sure we make it the very best package it can be. You know, over the last 2 years, as well as enjoying this job a great deal, I have learned a lot. But the most important lesson is that people are crying out for the partner they need. In 2019, we were not the party you needed us to be. The British public saw that, and they gave their verdict. And to be honest, I think if the Labour Party had been a company, it would probably have gone into administration at that point. But under Keir, we've done the hard work, and we have changed. And I truly believe we are now the serious partner you need us to be to best serve this country. And change is required. Even the Prime Minister thinks so. And I am tremendously proud of the many brilliant things we do here in the UK. But recognising where we need to do better and where the political system needs to do better, that is not talking the country down. It's being confident and excited and serious about the future. I believe Labour is now the party of business because we are offering you what you need, not a policy checklist, but a real, enduring partnership. And I'm afraid I don't believe that is on offer from the present government. What Labour can offer British businesses is a strong economy underpinned by fiscal discipline, a plan to invest backed up by an industrial strategy, Britain building again, working people secure again, skills, transport, infrastructure, energy costs, all being gripped by a government with a consistent mission to give Britain its future back. And that future, the Britain that we all want to see, it cannot be achieved without you. So yes, there are challenges, but we're up for that challenge. And I know that you are too. And I promise you, if I do get to be our business secretary, I will work every single day to give you and British business the future that you absolutely deserve. Thank you very much.
Johnny, thank you. It's so great to have you with us. Before I open up to the floor, I just wanted to take the opportunity to ask you the first question. I think it's great to hear that confidence and excitement and serious about the future and the partnership with business. But we know there are real challenges in our economy, and business investment hasn't recovered to its pre-pandemic levels yet. You talked a bit about some of the solutions that Labour would see to really help drive business investment. But when you travel the country talking to business, what do you see as the real solutions? What would Labour do differently to really help deliver that stronger business investment?
Yeah, absolutely, Wayne. I think that is the question, and I think you have to say that if you were to take our overall economic performance, really since the global financial crisis, that would in many ways be the biggest challenge we're facing. But when you add the challenges of Brexit, of net zero, of the sort of change in the international competitiveness of the UK from the Inflation Reduction Act and the EU response, I mean, this really is the pressing problem. And I think the first thing, of course, there are policies, things like planning, things like the apprenticeship levy, flexibilities I've just mentioned, and the need for a kind of a level of engagement from the government in terms of making markets and those propositions that are crucial. I think what I'm trying to get across as well is, look, I understand, to be honest, you've seen business secretaries come and go and you've seen chancellors come and go, and you have to be offering more than just the right words and the right policies. You have to think about the institutions that will shape that. And I think the point around the industrial strategy and the institutions and how we want to give that real power and clout in a way it's never had before, even under what Greg Clark was trying to do as business secretary. It's never had that before. That is what we're trying to get across, because I know people will look at us and say, look, it sounds good, it sounds, reflected in what we're asking for, but we fundamentally want to know there is a longer-term commitment, a set of institutional arrangements that will give us confidence in the UK again. And we are humble enough to recognise that is absolutely essential, and that for many potential investors in the UK, people tell us all the time, we looked at something, we wanted to make it happen, and we couldn't. And when I hear people say they've gone to France because of the Choose France policy, or obviously the magnetic pull of the US and under the Inflation Reduction Act, I think you've got to respond to that. I think that is, you cannot ignore what people are telling us on there, and everything we are trying to do in aggregate. And let's be frank, there are things we can do in the UK which you couldn't do in the US in terms of the regulatory side. There are things that you would never get through the US political system, which we would all be quite comfortable with. So we shouldn't be pessimistic about it, but it does demand a response from where we are now, and that is fundamentally what we're trying to get across, as our recognition and our policy prospectus for that.
Thank you, Johnny. I'll open up to some questions from the audience, so please do raise your hand if you wish to ask a question. My CBI colleagues will come to you. We have some paddles and signal to the stage. Please do say your name, your company, and please keep your questions as brief as possible so we can bring in as many as we can in the time allowed. So maybe,
Rain, I think we're taking some from the press first.
Yes, I will look to my colleagues to help us direct that. I can see... Brilliant.
So I think we've got Paul from Sky News first.
I was just about to say, I can see Paul Kelso from Sky News.
Paul Kelso from Sky News. Apologies to the members. If you do get into government, you'll be inheriting an extremely fragile economic situation, stagnant growth, a rate squeeze, and so on. How confident can you really be that your borrowing plans for investment won't be destabilising to the economy? And the Prime Minister has said this morning that those plans effectively come at the expense of any prospect of Labour tax cuts. Is he right?
Oh, look, I'm aware the Prime Minister's given another press conference. I understand there's another five priorities, is it, from the Prime Minister? I mean, look, I would simply say we began a conversation about, what we call our Green Prosperity Plan. Government attacked that. What have we seen since then, Paul? We've seen significant government subsidy for the Gigafactory in Somerset. We've seen significant government subsidy for the green steel transition plans in Port Talbot and in Scunthorpe, and the new facility in Redcar. So the government doesn't disagree with the proposition that we need to respond to this change in the global environment by the state playing a role in being a partner for that private investment. But what have they done? They've done it in a way, sort of by pretending they're not willing to do that, where they end up in a really difficult negotiating position. So let's be frank, everyone in this room knows, had this country not got the Gigafactory in Somerset, had it gone to Spain, what that would have said for the UK automotive sector, a crucial part of our economy, would have been very, very difficult indeed. So they're doing it in a way. They're not, I think, doing it in a way which gets the best deal, which shows the UK is open for business, which is the partner for that. Now, we clarified very clearly that, of course, that green prosperity plan is subject to our overall fiscal rules. Of course it is. That was the right decision to make. And it's important to say we recognise there is a certain degree of government spending already on the transition. So it's not additional to that. It's the money we looked at is the sum of money that is required. So it builds on what the government are doing. But I just don't think it is credible from the Prime Minister to have already made some decisions which essentially reinforce the case that we have made, then kind of pretend he's not doing that and then try and attack us for it. I think that what we're all familiar with the Prime Minister by now is a certain level of inconsistency, and I think for me this is another one of those things. So next I think we've got Lizzie from Bloomberg.
Thank you. Lizzie Burden, Bloomberg TV. So the Prime Minister has said that is the time now to turn attention to tax cuts. Would that be irresponsible? And while your colleague, the Shadow Chancellor, has said perhaps she wouldn't do an inheritance tax cut, do ordinary, hard-working Britons deserve tax cuts? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think speculation on any kind of fiscal intervention, whether it's tax cuts or anything else, when we are a few days away from the autumn statement, let's see the figures. I mean, we obviously, everyone again in this room will be aware that the kind of until those figures are updated, the baseline economic documents the government has, based on previous things they've said and done, are extremely challenging. I mean, you've got the freezing of personal allowances and tax thresholds for, I think, 6 years, yet you've still got implied departmental spending cuts after 23-24. So I would be certainly wanting to see the evidence base for any decision that is made. That we are absolutely unequivocal, is that we want working people to be better off. And what we have seen over the last 13 years, soon to be 14 years, is that they haven't been better off. I mean, you can just ask people, do you feel better off? What is your cost of living situation? And they have got that. But unless we get the economy growing more strongly than it has done since the Conservatives came to power, all of these questions about tax cuts, more spending, public services, they only get harder. And that's why our absolute focus is on which measures will make the economy grow faster, will attract more private business investment. And I think, to be honest, the focus that we've got compared to the focus from the government does change sometimes week to week, but I think the focus that we've got is the right set of priorities for the future of the country. I think we next have Sue from The Telegraph.
Hi, thanks. Just following up on that then, so do you think tax cuts, would Labour not prioritise tax cuts for the moment? And just another thing that Rishi Sunak said today, he said Labour often talk the talk on reducing the debt, but they lack the political courage to do so. What's your response to that?
Being lectured on political courage from the Prime Minister. I mean... Look, I think in response to all these points the Prime Minister makes, whether it's an assertion like that on the debt or it is a hint that there might be some tax cuts coming, what no one in government can get past is their own record. You know, who has put up taxes to the highest level by any historic comparison? It's this Conservative government. Has the economy grown even relative to our own economic history, on the trend rate of growth? No, it hasn't. Has the government been able to deliver on business investment? No, it hasn't. We've gone to the bottom of the G7. So I would simply say, if you want to compare the evidence base for previous Labour governments or the future plans that we have for a future Labour government, or what the Conservative Party has delivered over the last 13 years, I think the evidence of that is quite frankly pretty stark. And again, we'll look at what the evidence base is for any decision that will be made when that autumn statement begins. But I think there's got to be a level of self-awareness from the government as to their own record and the decisions they can make as a result of that. Next, I believe we have Richard from The Guardian.
Hi, thank you very much. So again, on the subject of tax cuts, it's the theme of the week. I wanted to ask a bit about your principles. I mean, you talk about the tax burden going to the highest level in 70 years. Would Labour be comfortable in maintaining highest rates of taxation as a proportion of GDP in 70 years? And if not, how does Labour finance its extra spending plans for investment in business and the green economy?
Richard, why have we hit the highest tax burden for such a long period of time as a percentage of GDP? Well, because we've had low growth. I mean, that is the fundamental reason for that. I don't think anyone right now thinks it's because public services in the UK are so kind of generously funded that, taxes have risen to meet that need. And that is why, look, I suppose it's unusual in a way, both from an opposition and a Labour Party, to put so centrally to their plans growth and business investment and the relationship with business that is necessary to deliver that. But there is, I try and get across to people, there is simply no way that any political decision in the next Parliament or the one after that will be anything other than extremely difficult unless there is a significant step change in the performance of the economy. And I really do believe, that the kind of changes, whether that's to the supply side changes to planning or skills, or the kind of investment plans that we have, I believe we can produce the step change in competitiveness that the UK needs, crucially, in order to do that. And I feel when I look at the government, when the US went ahead with the Inflation Reduction Act, very mixed messages from them. Some people kind of bemoaning it, some people saying they were catching up with us. I mean, that is pushing it somewhat, to say the least. And I make no apologies for putting that case for economic growth at the heart of what we do, which will fund all of our plans for public services in the long term. We've obviously got the switch spends that we've already identified for health and education to put more money in the short term. But the longer term health of public services, the need to put the investment in to make the transition work for working people and businesses, all of that is predicated on the increase in the attractiveness of the UK. And I am really, really confident that we can deliver that. And that is the fundamental answer that we have. And finally, I think we've got Michael from the Financial Times.
Thank you. One of the big asks, or probably the big ask from business this week out of the autumn statement, is the making permanent of the full expensing regime. Now, that money obviously doesn't all go towards financing the net zero transition, which you talked about earlier. In that light, is that a good use of taxpayer money? And just as a follow-up on that, can a Labour government afford to continue a full expensing regime alongside your Green's prosperity plan, or is it inevitable that 9 to 10 billion a year would have to be taken out of your Green's prosperity spending plans? Thank you. Yeah,
thank you, Michael. You are tempting me to make a spending commitment here at the lectern, and I'm just too good for that, I'm afraid. But look, we've always said, look, it's obvious, first of all, the increase in corporation tax without a change to investment allowances puts the UK in such an unfavourable position relatively that is something everyone has to be aware of. You then look at you're in a favourable position because of that, and then of course any allowance system that is time limited really blunts the effectiveness of that. So we have always recognised the case that you have to match the investment cycles of businesses to make a regime like that work. I think there is an interesting question as to whether sometimes the scope of those allowances is right. Do they reflect businesses leasing equipment as well as buying them? Do they reflect investments in human capital as well? So fundamentally, I want a long-term, stable position that makes the most attractive environment for private business investment as is possible, and clearly it's a crucial question. So that is one bit of the autumn statement I'm going to be looking at with considerable detail, but I think it's clear in terms of what we're fundamentally trying to get to in our objectives for a system like that.
Thanks so much. I will open up to the room for a few questions, but great to hear some of that response around full expensing. I never thought that we'd get so central, I think, to how we all talk about business investment. But I think us and the IFS also think some of the costings around that are perhaps lower than the OBR are setting out. So good to see that have some prominence. I will go, shall we go here to Becky, your paddle, lady in the second row there.
Good morning, Olivia Powers, UK Director at the Carbon Capture and Storage Association. Thank you very much, and thank you for your commitment to an infrastructure strategy and flagging the importance of CCUS. But, I mean, as you've mentioned, we're in a global race. The US era, the EU Net Zero Industry Act, and of course, climate change, we've got to move quickly. So really, I'm asking sort of what commitment, if Labour are to win the general election, can you give that the CCUS industry will be able to move forward at pace and will be able to build on the work that we've already done in terms of deploying the clusters, the business models, and the regulation? Thank you.
Take each one, or do you want them in threes? Or
do you want me? I'll gather one more. Maybe I could see there was maybe one from the back of the room. Ben Rhodes, I can see you've got a question there.
Thank you. James Robinson from Woburn Partners. The Labour Party has talked about, I think I'm correcting this is the right phrase, bulldozing through planning regulations. But you'll know, Johnny, as a constituency MP, that many of those planning proposals are unpopular locally, NIMBYism. I just wondered if you could give us any insight into what practical steps you will take as a government to change planning reform to balance those two interests, the national interest against local concerns and opposition. Thank you.
And maybe just a third question here.
Thank you very much. I'm Stephanie Boyce, former president of the Law Society of England and Wales. So we rarely hear of the economic contribution of the legal services sector to the economy, which we know is huge, some 60 billion and 6 billion in exports. But what we do know is, without a fully funded, effective functioning justice system, that contribution will decline. How will a Labour government prioritise investment in this sector?
Brilliant.
3 questions there.
Let me take this. Now, I should say, sometimes I get told by my team I speak for too long with the answers that I give, but those are great questions, and I'm going to try and be brief to get as many people in, but there's obviously a lot to say. So, Olivia, starting with your question, look, I mean, what an exciting sector you are in. Clearly an area where you would absolutely say there is a chance for the UK to have an absolute competitive advantage due to our history and obviously the North Sea that we should be really excited about. You are a prime example of the chopping and changing of policy. I mean, I was a newly elected MP when the original money was taken out from the government, and then we've got, you know, decisions now about some deindustrialisation decisions which are based on the fact it's not quite ready for them, even though it's going to be essential, and we always knew that. And so, look, we've made some specific commitments around the clusters, which I think is the right approach. We are completely committed to getting the business model that is necessary for you to really fundamentally open those up. I think there are some interesting regulatory issues there where we could be potentially playing a bigger role, taking emissions and storing them from maybe beyond the UK, and I think that is quite exciting, but you should be under no doubt that we're really excited by what you could do for us and how we could have that partnership around it. James, great question about the unpopularity sometimes of infrastructure. Look, you need a bit of courage, is the honest answer. You've got to remember as a constituency MP, yes, you will get people saying, I don't want these homes built next to me. Those people will also come a decade down the line and say, my kids have got nowhere to live, right? And your job as an MP is to represent people, of course it is, but it's also to give them some insight into some of the conflicting pressures and how you will find a way through that. And I have experienced this very much myself. I mean, if you want to know how serious people are on a national level to these changes, see what they do in their own constituencies is a good example. Look, I am the edge of Greater Manchester where I live and represent the edge with Derbyshire. We are planning some really exciting new things on housing. Yes, brownfield. A degree, we're going to have hopefully a new garden village that is on the green belt, but because I think that's the best way to deliver on the needs of people. And I can say to people, look, no homes are popular, but if we do this in this area over 15 or 20 years, we can get the upfront investment in infrastructure that you so badly need. And some people will oppose on the principle. You've got to understand, I think, a lot of people as well. It's been a decade and a half of really challenging settlements for public services. Of course they're worried about a GP. Of course they're worried about where the school places will be. But you've got to, I think, give them that bigger argument, I suppose. And I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it can be done. And I think, to be frank, on planning reform, the only way it can come about is through a Labour government. Because I think if you've seen what's happened in this Parliament with the housing targets and the pressure and the position of a lot of backbench Conservative colleagues, they couldn't get it through. But we are really serious. Because fundamentally, people like me, why am I here? Well, for a normal working class family in the North East, my family were able to buy their own home. My parents left school at 16, could buy their own home. Where does that happen in Britain today? So it's very much something that we're absolutely personally committed to. And finally, great question on the legal services sector. I'm a former legal trainee myself in the corporate sector, and very much appreciate that. I can't give you a specific commitment, see this slightly beyond my brief, but look, I would say we totally accept when people talk about public services, health and education clearly under pressure, the situation with the justice system, the delays that people are experiencing, something again which is very much felt on a constituency level when you see just the weights people have got for very, very serious cases in the criminal justice system, and actually, across the board. I accept your point entirely, and I'll get you some specific information about the plans from my justice colleagues around that.
Right. Thanks so much. I'm going to squeeze 2 very quick questions in, and then I know we do need to, you may be joining us a bit for lunch, but I don't want to stand too much between that. So maybe one in the front row, and the lady at the back in the middle.
Hi, Johnny. So just down here.
Thank you. Sorry.
So Adam Green from Equinity, the UK's leading share registrar. You mentioned the work of the Capital Markets Task Force and improvements to the City of London. Can you expand a little bit on the way Labour would drive developments in the capital markets, but also with digitisation of listed securities?
And the lady in the middle there, and then I think we'll have to leave it there. Thank you.
Hello, Rosina Robson from the National Hair and Beauty Federation. It was a question about skills. If you could say a little bit more about your plans for your skills and growth levy. We're a sector over time that's provided an enormous number of opportunities for young people, but affordability for employers at the moment and bringing in apprentices is a real challenge. So really keen to hear more about how small and micro businesses could benefit from the levy you have planned. Thank you.
Look, those are two fantastic questions again. I'll try and get time for both. But look, on the Capital Markets Industry Task Force, I think everyone is following that very closely. I think everyone, look, when I do a business roundtable, people will always raise, the health of listings in the UK, the concerns about access to growth, capital. I think actually what the task force is doing is really interesting, how they kind of broken down I think it's called the 5 fingers of policy activity. I think on things like pension reform, I've obviously followed this in this job, and having been the Shadow Pensions Secretary and the Shadow City Minister, it's an argument that I think is extremely interesting. I do think, as well as the kind of guidance which the Chancellor has put forward for investments in private companies, I think there is a question about the relative size, particularly of DC pension funds in the UK. When I compare it to the Australians, I think actually if you want pension funds to take more risk, you've got to look at ultimately the size of them and how much risk they could reasonably take. I think that's got to be a part of the conversation. I think one of the most fundamental bits is the analysis and making sure that we have the infrastructure in place to properly value and appreciate the new generation of businesses, which are some of the most exciting, but they're really intellectually property-based, and that obviously different to the past in terms of mining or financial services. I think actually that is coming along quite well. And look, I know often at a conference like this, people want to see cross-party agreement where it's possible. On the financial services and markets bill, we did broadly support that. We supported the secondary mandate for the regulator. So we do try and do that. But look, I think there's interest on both sides in getting this right and doing it in the right way. And I think actually this is one area where we're going about things quite well. And a great question on skills or in relation to health and beauty. I mean, look, the keynote policy on the apprenticeship levy and changing it to a growth and skills levy was really, first of all, it's obviously not working as it should at the minute. I mean, we've got a major skills challenge. There's underspends there. There's businesses reporting back to us that it can't work in the way that they want. Places where there's huge demand, they've got vacancies, and yet they can't bring the apprentices through there. We wanted to keep the sort of the hypothecation, the link, because otherwise it would probably just become another kind of tax, and you'd not feel that connection, and it would get lost into the Treasury in the long term. But equally, we wanted the flexibility. So if you are, for instance, spending 100% of your levy funds on apprenticeships right now, great, you can continue that. And if you've got underspend, we'll give you the flexibility to use that in a different way. And I think actually that is the right balance to strike. Need to protect, obviously, the position of smaller businesses who are below the threshold to pay it, which we said we would do. But it's getting that balance between those objectives that is right. And I think, alongside devolution of some skills policies, the technical excellence colleges, the pipeline that you then access by using that levy in a different way. That's what we're trying to do, the right mix of national and local, and fundamentally just listening to businesses and their experiences and responding to that with the right answers to that. And where we can finesse that and make that even better, of course, we're always willing to do that. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Just from us at the CBI, thank you so much, Johnny. Thank you for being open to scrutiny from across the pond. It's not easy being a politician, but really appreciate you coming here. I know there's more conversations to be had. We'd be delighted to invite you back. So thank you so much for being here today. I will hand over to John Foster, our Chief Policy and Campaigns. Thank you, Johnny.